never going back to 2019. So what will the new era look like? And most importantly, what is immediate that will affect the pocketbook and the outlook into next year so we can all get ready? Thank you for joining. I'm your host, David DuByne. Right along here with Ransom Godwin every Thursday night. Welcome wherever you are on this beautiful blue planet. We're going to take you through a couple hours of what do you think you can feel in the air? We all feel it. Something's changed to the point that you can cut it with a knife now. Before, perhaps, but now it's undeniable. There's something that pervades the undercurrent of our civilization. And as we go through this show tonight, we're going to try to talk about a few of these. And also, what do you feel? I mean, those listening out there, what do we feel? Is the world falling apart? Are we coming to some sort of cataclysm? What's the media broadcasting in terms of some sort of social upheaval? You look at the crypto market running. We're going to talk about that tonight because it's in earnest started. You know, the Bitcoin halving is coming in, I think, 50 days. I'll take a look when Ransom talks to see exactly how many days it is. But this time it's going to be different. You're going to watch and see the evolution of something in real time that you thought was never possible. Where you're going to watch something go with a true $2 trillion market cap to $100+ trillion in a blink of an eye. So much money is coming in, which indicates that money is going to leave somewhere. And this also broadcasts central bank digital currencies coming in. Talking about bail-ins on the banks of the great taking. Whether it's the weather systems, the climate systems, you know, one day in Texas, it's 90 degrees. The next day, it's below freezing. Same thing in Ohio, 75 degrees one day and then below freezing the next. I mean, the jet streams are out of their normal flows, incredibly visible for everybody. CO2 ain't the excuse, can't work anymore. People aren't buying it. It's too much, too fast, too wicked, too fast. And then the Indian Ocean forecasted cooling through new models would be, I mean, an absolute shocker. What it took to warm from the 1980s to what we see levels in the Indian Ocean would drop back to the 1980s levels in less than a year. I mean, that would be a rapid cooling. And where you look, the precipitation's off. They got droughts all over Europe. They're destroying dams, but at the same time saying there's droughts. I mean, there's a lot to talk about, and you can just feel something's way off. And that's what our program's about tonight. So Ransom, I appreciate you joining me. I know we're going to, go through several different topics tonight, but those of you out there, please comment. If you're watching us live over on Rumble or in the YouTube channel, over on Twitter, throw some comments in there. We'll take a look at them through the evening here. And also please remember to sign up for our show notes. After we talk, we try to just do 10 quick bullet points. I just sent those out to everybody who's already subscribed to the newsletter feed. Just 10 quick points. And I really tried to shrink it down this time because I, make it a quick one page, start a conversation with friends and family. And if you missed the show or you want to share with others, that's over on oilseedcrops.org, like one barrel of oil, seed, like one seed you plant in the ground, and crops, like each year we harvest crops. That's plural, CROPS.org. You'll find the MIAC show right there. Real easy on the top nav tab. But anyway, Ransom, thanks for joining tonight. As always, a pleasure. Welcome.
How's it going? Yeah, you see the whole landscape of the lawfare portion of the Great Reset. I think that's what's kind of going on. And, I saw a really good video with Max Kaiser on it talking about, the whole era of bonds and interest and, basically the U.S. dollar is it's necessarily going to pop. And now that the world's into a more commodities market, you're about to see food problems around the world as no more globalization as far as this is what's funny is he made a really good point, and I think people notice it. It's the explanation of why you have less choices at the store. It's because of what's going on you are going to have less choices of products at the store. So countries are going to be dialing back exports and keeping what they have, because we're now moving into a straight commodities market. And, you know, depends on who has the food, on who has a good market now. It's not about the dollar or the petrodollar. We're moving into a whole new phase. And that's kind of what we've been talking about. They're going to switch over to this central currency that you have to do everything on. And if you're not part of that system, they're going to limit the amount of products and basically food that you could get from different stores. And we talked about the food deserts that are appearing everywhere, and that's a real thing, and it's about to increase. Now imagine when these little shops that are only selling GMO goods, let's just put it simply like that, food like stuffs, obviously that's not a nutritional source to keep a population nutritionally fit. I mean, you can't just eat filler basically and survive. But the problem is a lot of the population right now, that's 90% of their diet already, right? So we're about to see a weird thing when even that, and I'm sure you saw the CEO of Kellogg's on TV trying to tell people that, we're going into a time of saving money. So you're going to have to save money and eat cereal for breakfast. Well, guess what? Cereal's made out of all those grains that are now in question worldwide. And I wanted to get into later showing people the amount of conflict and war that's going on the planet right now, because I think a lot of people really don't understand the extent of how the world has been segmented off into zones, either, unstable zones and other zones. They're doing different programs in each. And then when you look at the bigger picture, you could see the entire belt of the equator has, things going on there where you can't go to. And then you're hearing like all of these financial experts and business people that have moved to Costa Rica and El Salvador talking about it's like the frontier of freedoms and financial privacy and private property. And it's the exact opposite what they're saying of what's going on in the U.S., where properties are being absorbed by every bank, real estate agency, and corporation at an astounding rate. And it's going into an exponential area where in just 50 years I really don't see too many citizens owning their own property at that point. But as far as right now, a lot of weird stuff's going on. So I'm sure you saw that the New York City, what is she, the district attorney, I think she is suing the meatpacking plant over the environment. So that's where we're about to go. The stage of lawfare where they shut down our food resources and everything in the name of saving the planet. And, just looking back.
We're trying to solve the tech problem right here. And Ransom, while you work on that, I'll just respond to it and then jump right back in after, because we do live in the most Goldilocks 150 years to 200 years that this planet has given us in the last 10,000. There was a slight era around 8,000 years prior where the temperature had run up far warmer than the medieval warming period, where there seemed to be a burst of creativity, and what you know as the Sumerians coming out at that time in Mesopotamia was preceded during this Goldilocks zone, which was a little bit longer than ourselves here. It was probably about 300 years of what's considered a Goldilocks period with very few cataclysms, stable weather patterns. And this leads to being able to have very predictable planting and harvesting dates, which leads to the ultimate. This is the ultimate for our society. If you do not have enough calories, you cannot solve problems. You do not have a viable workforce. And this is the thing after these resets, these mud flood resets, or whatever you like to term them, global liquefaction events, electromagnetic induced or created, triggered for a better term, volcanic eruptions, along with these quote unquote mud flows that emanate from the Earth's crust. It takes them so long to come back to some equilibrium balance to have a workforce, to be able to grow enough food, to have the extra children and have extra population that's well enough fed to then go solve those problems of engineering and simple basic work to grow the food and clean off the debris to have a functional system, again, that infrastructure. It's this ebb and flow of that destruction, repopulation, calorific. Well, I don't even know which word I'm looking for, but growing enough calories again to push into the bellies of the populace, to allow them that extra bit of thinking time, creativity time, and the stability knowing that they will have food instead of your basic needs of all the time in your day is just pushed into feeding yourself and finding clean water, and defending yourself and trying to keep your habitation well enough where you're not invaded by lions or, get the insects out of there. Now, if you look at Africa and parts of India, there's an enormous amount of the population in these areas that spend a majority of their day trying to cover the basics. So they don't have this extra time to go out and do things to start trading on the stock market or, open up social media channels. They don't even have internet. We got Sound on Revolution Radio fixed. Yep. Okay. We're back on Ransom. We're back on Rumble. So again, even in our modern day, there's still areas on the planet where a majority of the lion's share of the day's time is spent for the very basics of food, shelter, water, hygiene. That's it. Like we in the West, we swing to the pendulum over where that is not even on the radar of even using a smidgen of your day, and everything else is spent for pleasure or trying to follow dreams and, move up and create. Okay, those are two spectrums. But after these resets, this Goldilocks zone that we're in has provided all this extra food for us, along with the Green Revolution, to bring most of our world back into the thinking and the creative problem-solving time. But when we swing out of that, which we are, the jet stream, just electromagnetic shift on our sun and our solar system in a wider fashion, and even further out into the, next couple of star systems, looking out of Betelgeuse, and expanding, glowing. And there's an enormous amount of activity in the spiral arm of our galaxy, which shows that there's an energetic change across the entire spiral arm, which is obviously from a Berkey current or something from the center of our galaxy that's changed in the energetic flows. I mean, the Mayans mapped this out forever. We're coming back into another very unstable time. So appreciate the Goldilocks zone while we have it. And Ransom, I'll leave that back to you again, because like you said, we have been in one of the most stable climate times in the last multiple centuries. So back to you, man.
Right. Well, my point is that, we're in the most stable time. And at this point, we're the wrong people are running things. So instead of the traditional producers throughout history that have created and sustained civilization, i.e. the farmers, the ranchers, the, domesticated animal caretakers, whatever you want to call it, sheepers, herders, and milk producers, cheese producers, all of those things. Those are the things that they're attacking now, and they're doing it through lawfare. We know there's been a long history of attacking the Amish for what they do. They produce because they're producers, but now you have actual government, local governments like New York sues meatpacking JBS over, weather. We'll put it that way. And I'm sure the readers could, I don't want to use the algorithm key buttons, but they attack climate on so many different ways and then have things that are unrelated to that. And my point is that all those times through human history, we're talking, tens of thousands of years, people were producing, which drove societies and created civilization, period. And all through those times, we had volcanic activities, solar cycles that affected things on Earth. And now they're saying, don't worry about none of that. It's just you as the populace. And I was pointing out they have this program in New Mexico, and they're calling it Go Vertical or something like that, which they're enticing people to move into basically modern pueblos, where everybody is packed in together. And unlike the pueblos of the past, most of those people would have been the interfamily, the village of people that are related to each other. What we're talking about is putting complete strangers, packing them together. And everyone knows how, government housing has turned out in other places. But what they point out so much in the article, and I'll bring it up in a minute, is that their concentration and their concern is about density. And when you reflect that against Agenda 2030 and some of these maps we talk about, and, the super state city that's being created everywhere, that they're putting the people from all over the sparsely populated equatorial zones and packing them into smaller countries. So, and you can equate that little story locally to the global pattern that's going on. It's about density, to pack as many people as possible in as small an area as possible to protect the planet. So, and I don't know when I got muted off or whatever, but we've seen through the communist regimes in the past that it doesn't work well when government authoritarians take control of the perceived ecological environment and how it works or doesn't work. So I wouldn't trust the agreements of today on those same topics, or we'll end up with stuff like, we had to kill the birds off because, they were eating all the seeds. And then, all the bugs came later and ate up everything that was left because there were no birds to, run off the bugs or eat the bugs. I don't want to live in that world. And things like this, suing New York meatpacking giant over the environment, is as silly as those ideas. But what's scary is it shows you that those people are in charge now, and there is a real Marxist, communist world government revolution happening worldwide. And I wanted to point out to people that because we're in the most comfortable time in history, it's allowing this to happen, where societies are so lethargic that they believe any story told to them by an authoritative source without critically thinking about it or using deductive logic to see if it makes sense. They just don't do that. It's a straight feed programming. And I know that links into our last show about how we're going through an ongoing, transformation of blending the world government and their technologies with the day-to-day activities of humans living as, the living human being there in the human domain. It's all being controlled, everything. And when they start attacking the food, and you see headlines like this, suing the meatpacking plant, and then you see the CEO of a cereal company trying to convince you to not eat beef for dinner, but to eat cereal. And keep in mind that these companies are now introducing new ingredients of a protein nature that is an animal life, but is not meat, bugs. They want you to eat those. and they're not asking you if you really want to or not. They're just switching over. So everything's in the conversion phase right now. And a lot of people want this super big event to happen so they can go ahead and deal with it mentally and get it over with. But unfortunately, it's an incremental plan that takes days and weeks. Now, I would agree that it's rapidly happening faster than in the past. The incrementalism is becoming more and more increased in nature. It's growing exponentially. So all of the weird worries, but also the weird triumphs that we have to have as human beings are about to have their own singularities, each and every one of them. Are we going to accept a transhumanist society that's a top-down dictatorship, or are we going to have the classical firewalls against tyranny, which are local villages, communities, states, and nations that protect ideologies that include freedom and individual choice when it comes to living their lives and what they intake into their body. I don't think Frosted Flakes, in my opinion, I'm not going to argue with the so-called experts, is that filling, for dinner. But that's just my opinion.
Yeah, when the people who know nothing about the integrated climate system and the integrated natural world ecosystem start to dictate because they saw something out of the corner of their eye one day, we're going to end up right back in the Great Leap Forward again. And that was the whole thing about that is what you just described there. And I'd like to maybe go into it for a little detail because I lived in China and worked there for a few years. And one of the things that I was always, when I would bring it up, people would shut me down every time because in China, if you bring up anything negative about what Mao did, it's suddenly, they got to defend Mao. So if you're just talking in public, they chastise you, even though it's your friend, they tell you to shut up because then they lose face or somebody might call the police on them for being subversive. It's still very scary. And that's way, way, way before the social credit system. This is like 2006, 2005. Leading up to the Olympics. And then after that, I left because I knew it was over. The heyday was over. Just like we know that our society is apexed already, probably around 2019. We had that really big burst of apex in 1999-ish was a good one, 98, 97, 98, 99, and that 20 years. And then we had another apex in 2019, Airbnb, and everybody was flying everywhere. The world was on high, and then everything was booming, and you knew the next day was going to get better, and then suddenly it got slammed down. And we saw COVID come in. So anyway, I'll take you back to China and the stories that I heard and read about because it fascinated me how so many people, they say about 30 million people starved to death there. And I thought 30 million people, that's just a huge, enormous amount, like crazy, bigger than world wars. And it's just not even a blip on the radar there in China. You're talking about billion plus and 30 million, whatever. So here it is, the Great Leap Forward. For those of you fans of Chinese history, they always have these 5-year plans, and they try to bring about this one 5-year plan. I think it was like late 1950s, early 1960s, and this 5-year plan was meant to boost agriculture and bring China into what we consider the Green Revolution and copy America and Canada and everybody else that was doubling, tripling, quadrupling, 5x their crop yields. But they didn't really have the machinery that the West did, and they didn't have the fertilizers to the amount that the West did, nor the herbicides at the time, obviously DDT and that sort of stuff. But they were trying to do it. They were trying to do it. But then this whole thing about you mentioned the sparrows, but there were other pests that were on that same list. There were 4 of them. So here's where it gets into communists trying to plan. Mosquitoes, rodents, flies, and sparrows were all targeted as disease/food destroying the naughty 4. So then they started to go on this campaign of, well, the ones they could really get easily were the sparrows because they were the biggest. Rodents run fast. They could catch a few, but, there was a bounty on each one of these things also. But flies and mosquitoes, it's like clean up your tires or, clean up your water pots and your plant pots. Don't let the water sit there, clean out areas. That was the whole thing about, like, in modern day, you go to Singapore, Taiwan, Indonesia, whatever. You leave a pot of water laying around, people are going to scold you because, dude, there could be mosquitoes that'll breed in there. So they've really gotten on it. here across Asia, because I'm here over in Taiwan, southern Taiwan now, and you just don't leave anything that collects water around because mosquitoes would get in there. And they do have this huge campaign warning of, don't let the mosquitoes breed. Look everywhere if you have any standing water. Go around your house at least once a month and look see if you have any standing water, because mosquitoes could breed. If you got standing water inside the, drainage sewers on the streets, or for, overflow for the streets for rainfall catch. If you see anywhere pooling, please call the government. We'll come and fix it, because we can't have the pool there because mosquitoes, they're really on it. They really, really get it. China was doing something similar back in the 1950s, early 60s with the mosquitoes also. The big thing was the sparrows. You're right. Once they took that whole part of the ecosystem out, boom, everything, the food supply just plummeted to nothing. They're eating grass out of the fields to survive. And when I say grass, I mean like the grass in your front lawn. So this is the way it was. And the way I envisioned it, as some people were describing it, was like you had all these millions and hundreds of millions of starving Chinese. Like if they would have come to an American lawn, they would have just fallen down on their hands and knees, just so thankful and blessed for the food, and just would have munched their way through the entire lawn, like that kind of eating grass. Like that level, really, it went to because of communist planning. And, the top-down approach, it gets done, but it got done in the wrong way. There was no checks and balance. I remember there was also the stories of there were ecologists at the time across China. China was really evolving at that time. A lot of people, bash it and thing, but they saw the light, man. They had their plan. They had their 100-year plan. They saw it go from A to Z, and they were implementing every 5 years. This transition to what you see China now was planned in the 1940s after World War II and early 50s. Like their vision of what China would be is what you see it now was their vision in the 50s. So they were trying to do these incremental steps to get it to where it is now. But these ecologists that were disagreeing with Mao all disappeared. Anybody who said anything negative about the program just disappeared. It wasn't they went to trial. It was just like, Mao, I think if you kill all the sparrows, we're going to have some food production losses. And they never saw them come out of the meetings. And they just disappeared forever. And the families would ask what happened. And then, the police would come and rough them up. Don't ever ask about it again. Those were the people who disagreed with the program. So obviously then everybody started to agree, oh, yes, Mao, this is great. Kill all the sparrows, awesome amente. But you'll start to, and speaking of mosquitoes, look at Brazil, what's happening right now. They released all those genetically modified mosquitoes, and dengue fever is now 4 times higher in the instances from last year than it was previously. So they released all those mosquitoes that were supposed to interbreed with the regular, the black and white striped ones. We call them zebra mosquitoes. If you see a zebra mosquito, those are the dengue carriers. Anybody who's ever traveled across anywhere tropical, you see a black and white one, danger, Will Robinson, right there. And they were supposed to be neutral, and they were supposed to have no reproductive capability. And then they let hundreds of billions of these mosquitoes go across the Amazonian areas and in Brazil. And then these mosquitoes over the last year, apparently, I don't know if they're breeding with something, and there's a cross of genetics or whatever. Not sure on the science on it because there's so little information. All they have is a correlation of you released the mosquitoes last year, and this year we got 4 times more dengue cases. That's a direct correlation. So they're spinning their wheels down there in Brazil trying to figure out what's going on. You got Lula that's under massive protest because of the farm subsidies and you think, and the farmer protests ripping through Europe are very much starting to rip through Brazil because of the very same policies trying to be implemented from the top down world governance system into Brazil, and they're not having it. They're not having it either. So there's a huge amount of strikes, protests, and they're, calling on Lula to step down and get out of your globalist boots because we're not having that here. Your farm policies are destroying our country and our livelihoods. It goes all around the country. Now we're seeing a full second continent start to get engulfed in these farmer protests based on globalist agendas. And, it's once there's one, then there's two. And when there's two, there will be three. Which I will take you back to, if I could, the grandiose, amazing world that we lived in 2018 and 19. Do you remember when the central bank protests across the world were raging? Every day, hundreds of millions of people were out in the streets every day. And it was 22 countries at that time. And it was going to for sure be 23, 25, 30, 35. There, if you can remember, look back, there were hundreds of millions of people on the street demanding change from the central bank issuance of sovereign nation currencies that was being debased by the inflation, and the quality of life was so degraded that they were coming out in mass. I mean, hundreds of millions of people daily locking up countries. And then COVID came in and everybody just went home. And you could see it. What's going to happen next? European farmers, if I may, just for a moment, talk about the European farmers. So we saw it in the beginning start as, well, the Dutch farmers, and they were trying to get their land taken away. So it was just the Dutch, and then everybody else was very much hands off, like it's just the Dutch. They got to deal with it. It's their country, whatever. But then those policies swept across Europe in a matter of less than a year. So what was happening to the Dutch, everybody was hands off. And they're like, whatever, man, your cows are getting, you have to, cull all your cows, and you can only have one cow per like 5 acres, and you used to be able to have whatever you wanted on there. But within management, because, that's the whole thing about European management style of farms is, a little bit more kind to the environment. It's more holistic than it is in the U.S. with the cattle feedlots. These farmers really, it's a small area, so they had cows running, and a lot of them wild, but they did feed them. They gave them grain, but they also let them grass feed in addition. They were told they had to reduce their herds and sell their farms, and then if they didn't sell, they were forced to sell under eminent domain, and they got 20% more than market value. But a lot of those families, those were multi-generation farms, like 5 generations, 3 generations, but they were forced literally at gunpoint to sell their farms. So everybody had that hands-off approach. Well, it's not our country. And then suddenly 9 months later, it was every country in the EU. And they realized, oh, sheesh, we should have come to the aid of the Dutch, but we didn't. But now it's happening everywhere, and the cat's out of the bag, and every farmer realizes in unison across the EU that there's nowhere to run or hide anymore. It doesn't matter if you're in Estonia or if you're in Slovakia. Doesn't matter. If you're in Italy, in the mountains, you can't hide from the legislation anymore. That bought you some time, just keeping your fingers off and not protesting. It only bought you time. It didn't buy you invisibility from the machine marching forward. So now every farmer realizes they're next. And in Ransom, you and I talked about this. Once they have no hope, and they're all realizing it at the same time. Now they've gone over to stopping trains on the tracks coming in from Ukraine and pulling the chute levers and just emptying the grain out on the tracks. So if any of you have ever seen these grain trains, now some of them in America are more than a mile long, like a mile long, half mile long, takes 10, 15 minutes for them to pass. The ones in Europe aren't as large. They're probably about 4 minutes would be a long one. So you're looking at about 100 to maybe 150 cars running grain on rail to take it in. But they would just block the tracks with their tractors. Because apparently there was like this, again, why is Telegram being demonized? Because Telegram sharing was telling you the routes and the times of passage of certain trains coming out of Ukraine laden with grain through Telegram app messaging of you need to go to this place, this town, and this train will pass at this time. And they would just sit there and wait, and the farmers would block the tracks with their tractors, and the train would stop, obviously. And they would just get out and all run in and pull the chute, and all the grain came dumping out. Well, then the whole rail system's blocked because you got, 1,000 tons of grain sitting on the tracks, and it's all wet and moldy. Nobody's going to buy it, can't put it back in again. So this is one way that they're doing it currently. And also anything transiting across national borders, as I talked about, in Croatia, the business owner, restaurant, said he was forced under the new EU mandates, because Croatia is a full member using the euro now, was forced to buy Spanish squid when they have the Adriatic Sea an hour and a half away from Zagreb where they can get squid. But he was forced to buy the squid. in another country and transported across the EU. So what they're doing now is anything coming out of anybody's countries, if it's not from your country, they're stopping those trucks. They're not harming the drivers or anything. They're stopping the trucks and they're opening it up and throwing all the produce out the back, right on the highways, right on the streets. So then again, that blocks traffic too, because you got 100,000 tomatoes tossed out onto the highway. And this is the new method that they've gone to. This has swept through Europe so quickly that it's blindsided anybody there. And if you've watched the latest videos on how farm equipment can just rip through blockades, barriers, barbed wire, X posts, and anything else, fencing, gating, whatever, you should see how quickly the farmers ripped apart all these barriers going around the EU headquarters in Brussels. They just went through it I'm not even going to say knife through butter. They went up with their buckets and ripped and back dragged, and it was gone 200 feet of it. So these police were all like, yeah, you're just trying to spray him and spraying pepper spray and spraying him with water cannons. You're not coming. And it only took one tractor to rip away 200 feet of barrier in under 25 seconds, back dragging it. And you should have seen the police. I thought they were going to crap their pants, being all tough guys behind the fence, shooting pepper canisters and, this kind of thing with the big water cannons. And they ripped all the barriers back, and you should have seen them. They looked like naked, drop. It was I can't describe to you the response. They thought they were all safe behind the barriers. Hundreds of tractors, thousands of protesters, and then the barriers got ripped away, and there's only 20 police behind there, and they're like, oh my, that's not safe at all. And then they backed up and took off and split out of their positions. Now this is happening in Brazil. So, South Americans, feisty, if you ever dated a South American girl or guy, you know what it is. Very vivacious in the arguments and very vivacious in the life. And there's a different way of looking at things, and they don't back down. That's the whole thing. Arguments, So it is sweeping the planet. So Ransom, I think that when you're talking about food labeling, less food in the shops, less choices, et cetera, this is just going to amplify. But here's the thing that I wanted to get across. That's what the elitists want. They want the food supply to stop, but they're making the policies so we, the people, stop the food supply. And that's the most nefarious thing. The policies they're passing are making us do their dirty work, because if the globalists were going to stop the food supply, the entire population from mom and pop to the kids and everybody in between would be overrunning all the parliamentary buildings, and everywhere across every Capitol building would be inundated, surrounded by millions of people going, you can't cut off our food supply. But all they need to do is pass the legislation that causes the farmers to get so angry that then they start to protest and cut off the food because of the policies. And what happened is the same end result. The food supply is being cut off by the people because of the policies. See how nefarious that is? I'm trying to wrap my head around it, Ransom, and I think you might have an idea of what I'm trying to impart or continue the conversation with. So please, go with that idea of how they've got us to do the dirty work for them to achieve the end result they couldn't achieve on their own because they would have been overthrown trying to do it. But the people doing it is now the people doing it to the people, which is how did they get that chess move on the board, man? That is crazy how they did that.
Well, they probably just looked back at history and, looked at every little conflict that started and what happened at the beginning when the armies were consistent of people from the nation they lived in. So in other words, now you're looking across Europe and you see them panicking. So you see Italy and France and all of these other countries now saying they're going to contribute troops to the Ukraine effort. And what's going on in the background is that farmers were upset and were calling them on their programs of future starvation and control of the food. And they've destroyed the roads. They've, plowed fields. All kinds of weird stuff is about to pop off. But there's already this pre-planning preparation that you see going on. Whether it's intentional or not, it'll have the same effect. So if you were a force and you wanted to consolidate the population Well, you would try to get them to city centers and more populated areas because it's easier to deal with smaller populations in areas that you might want. So if we were going upon that logic, and let's see here, let me put it on screen for everyone, and you wanted to look at where all the conflicts, maybe all the food is actually coming from, you'd look at stuff like this. So here's the ACL-ED conflict index. And when we look down here at the map, of course, you see Ukraine, but they now have the United States, Russia, and I'm sure that if you look back at this map soon, it will include Italy, France, Spain, the United Kingdom, all of the people that are lining themselves up to take sides in this future Eurasian conflict over the Ukraine. And I might add that all through history, this is basically the area where massive wars have been fought all the way into antiquity, up into the world wars that we just had. And, just look at the list of these countries, though. And if you pay attention, the ones in red and the ones in pink, which are supposed to be, extreme and high danger due to wars and civil wars and other things, are all around the equatorial region. And they're all also where the ancient world used to live, where their population centers were. But now those population centers are moving. So if you're wanting to consolidate population around the world, let's say for the goal of protecting the planet, you would increasingly move the populations into city centers. And then if you had to have conflicts out in the countryside, those people in the city centers may not like it or agree with it at first, but soon, when the food starts running out, they will agree with going out and dealing with the people that will be blamed for the stoppage of the food production, or the people that are, saying, I live here, I'm not giving up my farm, I'm not giving up my livestock. Those people will be blamed for the reason that the people in the city centers are not eating, and they will be happily moved along to join forces with people that are going out to destroy those areas, to remap civilization. And, obviously, necessarily the populations will decline on both sides, both from the cities and from the rural areas. And on this map, you can see, everywhere that food grows. Basically, you have Mexico, Brazil, Colombia, Guyana, because they're about to get invaded, Guatemala, El Salvador, and then you move over into Africa, and it's all the places where we know there are underground aquifers, and the last of the biodiversity is in the Congo, the Chad, Sudan, Ethiopia, Nigeria, Niger, Mali, the Republic of the Congo, and then we have Libya. And I would say that you could go ahead and include Egypt because of the regional war that is now breaking out in the Middle East. So you could include Saudi Arabia, Qatar, United Arab Emirates, and Oman, because they are on the side of the U.S. and Israel. And this expansion of combat is going to meet right here at the Black Sea in the countries of Georgia and Armenia. And it's pretty obvious to see that with this map right here, where you see conflicts or ongoing conflicts about to happen. And the last little space is these 2 or 3 little countries here. There's Buka, I guess, or Baka. I don't know. Baku, excuse me. I don't know how to say that.
Yeah, that's
exactly.
The oil fields out there in the Caspian Sea basin.
Right. So
a lot of sulfur in the oil. They got it's heavy sulfur. It's really sour crude out there.
Yeah, and then when you look at this map, so you can tell that that's the last little space between the two conflicted zones that are expanding there. And then when you look over to the west, you see Italy, France, Germany, and all the countries that are now saying that they are going to join with NATO and that they're going to put over troops. What does that mean? It means that if a regional conflict happens, they're going to conscript the youth of Europe and the youth of the United States and anybody else that gets in the conflict to reduce their populations, and this is by choice. This is going to be by choice. A lot of people are going to join this conflict before it even gets to the conscripting point through the propaganda of the news media is telling it. So this is real time things that are going on there is about to affect not only the worldwide energy consumption, but the food production. And it gets back to what I was talking about, Mike Kaiser saying, I forgot his name. But he was talking.
Max Kaiser.
Yeah,
I've been trying to get an interview with him. If anybody knows how to reach out to him, please tell him David from Adapt 2030 wants to do an interview with Max.
Right. And he was talking about it being completely changed over now to a commodities market as it stands present. Well, what does that mean as far as like a map that we're looking at here? That means that this is a commodities war. That means that the last remnants of powers on earth are scrambling to get a hold of the last areas and all of the areas that can produce commodities so that they can have it internally compartmentalized for the conflicts ahead in the next decades. And, they're even listing, the United States because, of course, we're about to enter into these regional wars in Eurasia and the Middle East. And you can see the entire focal point would be the Ukraine grain fields and this area right through here that grows all of the food for Russia, which is on the Russian side as well. So if you can get this part of Russia completely bogged down in a war and Western Europe starting to, break apart in a shatter belt, taking sides, which is absolutely what happens every time, then there will be zero production from France all the way over to Russia. And that means a lot of starving people. And the same thing will happen in Turkey, Syria, Iraq, and Iran. And then over, of course, Africa is already compartmentalized, basically. But then you move over to where we live, where we've traditionally been safe from these kind of things. And like I've been saying, I think we're about to have a combat zone along the U.S.-Mexico border. And that's exactly why they list this on this list. And then you have Colombia, Venezuela.
Well, they put that as extreme. What? When you're moving the map around, I was kind of focusing on Brazil and Nigeria and thing. I didn't see Mexico right there. Sheesh.
Yeah, they have Mexico listed. So down here, further down, and I went to a couple websites. They all basically have the same. They have Myanmar, or Myanmar, if I could talk, Syria, Mexico, Ukraine, Nigeria, Brazil, Yemen, Iraq, and then you got the Democratic Republic of Congo, Colombia, Palestine, Haiti, Afghanistan, India, Sudan, Guatemala, Pakistan, Honduras, Somalia, Bangladesh. So basically everywhere that produces food in the world. And you can keep looking. There's South Africa listed on there. Of course, turbulent. And I would say that some of these countries that they're only listing as turbulent have actually moved into the extreme zone. And then over here, where they're, trying to convince people to give all of their the wealth that they have and transfer it over to these combat zones, and we're looking at the whole world burning up. And over here, we're suing the meat packing plant because, the environment. And they're telling you eat cereal for dinner. When I was 17 or 18 or a bachelor, maybe a bowl of cornflakes when I was on a budget might have did for a bachelor dinner, but that's not going to sustain anyone. And if you're not growing food right now or looking forward to setting it up where you can grow food, there's going to be some really hard times here, because what happens there eventually dominoes to this side of the world, whether it's actual combat or strife over here, which will take more time, I think, because we have to go through the lawfare phase here. So we're redesigning our entire civilization as far as it goes on how citizens and government relate and what's legal and what's not legal. So we're fundamentally transforming that here. When they're done with that, then we'll be at the European phase that they're in over there, where they're trying to regulate people off of their land. And if we went back just 1,000 years, what we're talking about is massive wars fighting over people's basic homes and homeland, or their traditional land that they lived on, farmed on, and raised animals and stuff throughout civilization. So we're seeing a continuance of basically what you've watched on the History Channel when ancient powers like the Romans and different groups moved around and changed the map on us. That's what they're doing now. And the main point, I think, is this decade of reduction of population and consolidation of populations in designated areas. And that exactly what they're even openly saying in different places where they're designing neighborhoods and they want to put everybody inner city. And that will make it where when you have the central currency and you live in the inner city, you'll have to play by their rules, and everything you do will be mandated and regulated. Otherwise, you won't have that little card that they've already brainwashed, I'm going to say, a third of the public to use already in the form of SNAP benefits and food stamps, which is basically the digital soup kitchen card of the future. And we're there. And just imagine, as more and more jobs disappear and more war happens, only certain people are going to come out the other side of this transition with wealth. And those are the people that are playing the game with the system, or they've acquired wealth in areas that cannot be regulated, from Bitcoin to actual physical gold. But I do want to keep you guys in mind that physical gold, unless you have it hid really good or in a stable environment, let's say, you can look no further to World War II to see how a military force can strip an entire population of their belongings, including their precious metals, deeds, and other things. And I think you're going to absolutely see that unfold in the next couple of years, even in places like the Middle East and Europe, especially around the edges of these increasing hostility conflict zones.
And as we get on the break here, hey, Revolution Radio, thanks for letting us talk. And anybody who appreciates free speech, please consider a donation to Revolution Radio to keep it on air for the production costs. That's revolution.radio. Check out the donate tab in the top browser bar. And Ransom, that map that you had, Republic of Georgia, I was considering moving there because it had survived and would be one of the most stable climates during the grand solar minimum or any types of very large climate change, because between the Caspian Sea and the Black Sea, they've been growing grapes and wine for vineyards and wine vines for the last 8,000 years continuously.
This is Mysteries in the Histories. Over a period of 6 weeks in 1994, the small town of Oakville, Washington was hit with a bizarre string of storms that rained weird gelatinous blobs all over the town. And then people started getting sick. This is the weird and still unsolved mystery of the Oakville blobs. It began raining the clear gelatinous goop on the 7th of August. No one knew where it came from or what it was. The blobs contained similar-looking white cells as humans. People in the town who had contact with the blobs began feeling sick and scared a few hours later. Residents in the small city reported that what fell from the sky was not water, but gooey, slimy, clear and translucent blobs the size of a grain of rice. Over the next 3 weeks, in an area measuring 20 square miles, there would be 5 more events of the terrifying ooze raining down on unsuspecting citizens. There were reports of people developing flu-like symptoms from contact or proximity to the blobs, even of animals dying. The very day of the raining blobs. So what was it? And was it making people sick? A sample of the Oakville blobs was sent to the Hazardous Material Unit at the Department of Ecology of Washington State. Once received microbiologist Mike McDowell found 2 species of bacteria in the Oakville blobs, stating one of these was known to infect the human digestive system. But scientist Mike Osweiler of the Washington State Department said they found a number of cells of various sizes and 2 types of bacteria in the blobs, but were unable to identify them. They did, however, note that the cells did not have nuclei. This was significant because it refuted a previous claims that the blobs contained human-like white blood cells, which do have nuclei. So what were the Oakville blobs? One theory is that it was jellyfish or parts of jellyfish dispersed into rain clouds by bombing runs carried out by the Air Force. Another theory, fluid waste from an airplane toilet, but the U.S. Federal Aviation Administration pointed out that this would have been blue, not translucent. Still another theory is that of an example of panspermia, an event dropping the unknown cells down upon the Earth. Panspermia is the hypothesis that life exists throughout the universe, distributed by space dust, meteoroids, asteroids, comets, and maybe even clouds of raining blobs perhaps. What if it was fluid waste from a UFO or UAP toilet? Just think about that for a minute. Ever since the 14th century, there have been reports of a substance very similar to the blobs in Oakville being found elsewhere, called star jelly, astral jelly, or astromixin, named after the legend that it falls from the sky during meteor showers. What if the blobs never rained in the first place, that they emerged from a more earthly plane? This would require overlooking the witness statements of those who saw the blobs fall. But it has been a theory. All the original uncollected blobs have long disappeared, and there are no known remaining samples of the Oakville blobs, including at the Washington Department of Health. They apparently have no records of ever receiving any, but allegedly, the Washington State Department took all known samples and somehow misplaced them. Inter alia, frog spawn, sodium polyacrylate crystals or algae have been the source of other blob events. However, there are many unexplained instances of the raining goop, including in 2013 when slime was found at the Ham Wall Nature Reserve in Somerset, England. Despite sending samples for DNA testing to the Natural History Museum, just like in Oakville, no conclusion was ever reached or explanation given. Raining blobs of Oakville is another one of the great mysteries in the histories. Sign up to our show notes email list and get access to longer episodes of Mysteries in the Histories just for signing up. Signing up for the show notes, you get behind-the-scenes thoughts and points we sometimes can't relay over social media platforms. Brought to you by ITM Trading. ITM Trading has spent the last 28+ years developing a team of expert researchers and gold and silver analysts to make this possible. Simply put, we build strategies which are historically proven to protect your wealth and assets through any economic downturn. 866-834-1422. That's 866-834-1422.
Hello? Hello, hello.
And welcome back to the second hour of Mini Ice Age Conversations. I've been rambling for a full minute with my mic on mute. I'm glad you said that for me, Ransom, there. Hey, awesome advertisement. Really enjoyed that. Histories, mysteries. Make sure you do sign up for the show notes. Get those out to you on a weekly. And I was trying to frame how to bring in the second hour here. All these changes that we're seeing, it is going to be about food. It's going to be about, the economy. It's going to be about having the resources. If you're stripped of your resources, how can you keep something that can be stripped from you? Well, cryptocurrency, because I know a lot of people want to talked about it in the first hour. We were going to talk about this because there's so much happening that this, I do believe, is going to define and intersect and move like a strand of DNA together all through the rest of the year here into next year, obviously. But speaking of protecting, if you were going to have your gold stripped from you because you're trying to walk across a border or you were trying to walk across the countryside and people stole everything you had, you can only cash your gold and silver on your property, because if you have to leave, like in most times you did, you're going to be waiting a fair few years to get back to find that. Now think about Ukraine, totally cool country. When I was traveling in Croatia previously, it was like 18, 17, everybody's like, man, you got it. And the last time we were over in Europe too, around like 2013, 14, they're like, oh, you got to get up to Kiev. You got to get up to, Ukraine. It's the best country. It's the most lively. There's a whole bunch of investment. You got to get there. Like everybody was raving about this place. And then you go and you looked how remote it was. I was thinking, damn, this is super remote. Like, look at all this countryside out here. Like, thinking about the Republic of Georgia as places to go to, set up for escape from the grand solar minimum. A stable climate, 8,000 years of continuous history growing wine, vines there, wine production. And you look at Ukraine, breadbasket of Europe for sure. I'm thinking, all right, these places would be cool to set up. But now looking at it, imagine if you had your pullback position in really remote Ukraine and like, man, nobody's coming out here. We'll be able to survive this out here. Like, think about all those things in history that people have thought. Like that story of Guadalcanal, a guy from Australia saw the war coming and was like, dude, I'm going to move to the most remotest place in the world. Nobody will ever find it ever. This war is just going to we'll pop our heads back up after a few years and they moved to Guadalcanal. So these things happen. Like if you were in Guadalcanal and you had your gold and silver and all your stash with you, do you think you'd be leaving Guadalcanal with your stash? I don't think so. You could bury it, but you got to come back 20 years later. The same thing. You're going to run with your assets. How are you going to run with them? We saw through history, things are stripped all the time. Cryptocurrency is a way around that because all you need is a 12 or 16 word key memorized in your mind through a story. Most times people do a story. The elephant went to the White Mountain, and then some of these are your keywords that when you write down the story and remember it in 6 or 7 sentences, that you can remember your key and then just reset up your wallet in a different country. I mean, they could strip your mind. I get it. But it's going to be way easier to walk across the border with absolutely nothing on you, not even a scrap of paper, and go reassemble that pile of ashes somewhere else. So cryptocurrency is a definite way to move assets across borders. And as we look at what's going to happen here with this halving coming up, and I said I was going to look at the Bitcoin halving date. You can hear the rooster in the background there. I live and am staying out in the countryside of our Taiwan house. Again, staying in the countryside. There's the little dude telling us hello for the morning. You can get as remote as you want, but sometimes circumstances are going to require you to, on the fly, abandon your property and get it on somewhere else. You're going to have to leave everything behind for a minute. And then what? You're going to have to think about starting over, and you can go back and get your gold and silver that you stashed somewhere on your property. And crypto seems to be the new way to do it. Now, a lot of people don't like it. They say it's the mark of the beast. I'm going to say your credit cards and the banking system are mark of the beast also in a light version. I've heard the excuse, well, when the power goes off, you don't have access to your crypto on the internet. Well, when the power goes out, you don't have access to your ATM cards, and none of your credit cards work either. So it's same, but different. You get the purists trying to say, well, your credit cards won't work and the ATMs won't work. Well, go try to do that in a power out in an emergency situation where they actually turn off the ATMs so people don't loot them. Your credit cards and your ATM won't work there either. Bitcoin halving, 52 days from now. Now, what's different about this one? I'm trying to preface the next hour here, and I know Ransom's going to run with some good ideas after this. Cryptocurrency in its infancy from 2012 and the first halving, and then the second halving 2016, and then the third halving in 2020, and now we got 2024. This is the halving where, Bitcoin gets scarce after this because they're only going to get, I think, 3.25 Bitcoin per block when they solve. But institutions are coming in. If you go back the last few years and you look at the history in cryptocurrency, especially in like 2016, 17, when they were demonizing it left, right, and center, it's only for, this, that, and the other illicit use. The entire media machine demonized this entire space as long as they could keep the firewall and push back against the wall until Wall Street came in and set themselves up to now control the market. You heard from day one, this thing's a scam, it's going to go to zero. But now I think there's 20 firms, 20, Wall Street recognized big banks, Citibank, JP Morgan, on the way down, all starting their exchange traded funds revolving around Bitcoin. So put this in perspective. You have 20 new stock market listed players coming in to start their own trading funds just for Bitcoin, but they need Bitcoin. They can bid at any price and buy it at any price. So currently the market value is around 2 trillion. We'll call it even. It's a little more, but it's around 2 trillion. For this to fully functional, to be functional and operate in the world we understand it as, where stock market can be bought and sold and ETFs can be exchanged, and this ecosystem is going to require about 100 trillion in capital. And that's if no more ETF players come in. So if it's at 2 now, they're looking at a 50x run up just on the demand from Wall Street. Now, this is not financial advice. This is just what everybody in this space is talking about. So generally, they would look for, Bitcoin to probably top out around $220,000 to $250,000 this cycle. But everything's going to run with it too. So if you've been holding on to some of those crap coins and things you wanted to get rid of, and you're just like, oh man, I only got like 20 of this, so it's not worth anything. Just hold on to it through the cycle here. It's going to take you another year, but you'll be able to get out of that. Not a financial advice. I'm just saying through the past patterns, when it rises, everything rises, and you can. Something that's a few cents now will be a few dollars later. But the understanding of this demonization of this entire crypto space into sort of mainstream acceptance now through main banks and Wall Street players and listed companies on Wall Street saying, hey, it's a great thing. We're going to all invest in it. By the way, mom and pop, your financial advisor has just advised you should join and put some of your money into a Bitcoin ETF. Can you imagine the shock on people's faces when like your mom and dad or whatever, everybody who's like, that thing's going to zero, is told by their financial planner, you need to think about allocating 5% of your retirement savings into the Bitcoin ETF. That in itself is going to change the metrics of money on our planet. Everybody on the entire planet is about to realize that this thing has legs and it's a real deal investment. There's gold, there's silver, then there's money in the bank. And you're going to watch a reversal of what had just happened over the last year that sank Silicon Valley Bank, First United Trust, and all these other ones that had bank runs because people were pulling their money out. Banks were offering 0.25% in interest. But then there was these money market funds over here offering 5%, 6%, 7%. Just move your money over here. We'll give you 5%. We'll call it even 5. So there was a huge drain out of the regular banking system that moved money out of just savings accounts and checking accounts into money market accounts that offered you 5%. That was a huge drain on liquidity, which is still ongoing, and banks are struggling at best. That's why they keep talking about bank bail-ins, starting up central bank digital currencies because of the collapse of banks, because the writing is truly on the wall with this event. Like it moved. So do the progression of where it's moving. Where's capital accumulating right now? And where was it moved? You can clearly see where it's going to go. And this is how it's going to drain the entire banking system of the world and move it into cryptocurrency. So banks were collapsed, dozens of them, just from the movement of money from 0.25% into a 5% return. And we saw the banking contagion across the United States and the world collapsing. Even Deutsche Bank having difficulty, Swiss Bank getting rattled to the bone, having to reorganize, getting bought out by another institution because they were quote unquote bankrupt. This is the reverberation from 0.25% money moving into 5%. Well, what you're looking at here with the new rise in prices with Bitcoin and this halving, and subsequently the next year as this thing screams above 200,000 of Bitcoin, you're going to watch that 5% money move and that 0.25% money move all move over into the crypto space. And anything that people have, they're going to be the contagion and the fear of missing out, the FOMO. This is going to move trillions out of our banking system into the crypto space. I'm just saying, get ready for it. This is going to be all part of that movement to collapse the system by giving validation that Bitcoin has legs. Now, if they would have done this in 2016 or 2012, 2020, it wouldn't have the same impact as it does now because the system is so precarious, and you saw that little money movement just collapse banks from up to 5%. Now, what if I was to offer you a 1,000% return on your money? What if the most conservative financial planner said, I can give you 100%. I can give you 100%. You can double your money by going into a Bitcoin ETF during this run up. That 5% is moving to the 100%. And all these people that thought that it was a terrifying idea, don't trust any crypto, are suddenly going to realize that they got duped and it's way too late and they better buy what they can because they got duped for the last umpteen years. And now suddenly Bitcoin's legitimate as an investment vehicle. Now, the amount of money that's going to move in this is going to shock and awe, because these ETFs before, I'll walk you through the last 6 months. Like, we saw a lot of bad things happening in the banks. So a lot of people moved their money into gold ETFs to be safe. Well, that money that moved into the gold ETFs over the last, say, year or 6 months all just fled and went right into the Bitcoin ETFs. When you look at these charts, one goes straight down, which is the gold money in the ETF, and the other Bitcoin ETF goes almost straight up in a curve. Like, the divergence is something you never, ever, never, ever, ever see these things. Market moves like this. I mean, they're making new terms for this because it's never occurred before. And Ransom, I sent you that slide there. Bitcoin has the largest gain in a candle ever in a run-up pre-halving. So with all the interest of Wall Street coming into the cryptocurrency space, and the legitimacy of it given now to the entire planet's population that realized they missed out unless they buy it right now, there's going to be very little money hanging loose to go back into the checking account or into the savings account. It's all going into the crypto space. Now, Ransom, I'm going to pose the question to you then. Like, if that much money moves out of our regular banking financial system and out of the stock market where people are going to trade out of stocks, so I'm getting, a 3% return, I want to get into the Bitcoin ETF too. I already got my money locked into stocks. I just sell it and I swap it over into an ETF. I can do that in about 15 minutes. And then I'm in on these big gains running up on the halving. This is going to affect the stock market too. People are going to want to exit out of the stock market and get into the Bitcoin ETFs. It affects everything from pennies to dollars to stocks to bonds to real estate and everything in between. That money is going to move over to where the flow is the biggest. And this is going to be the largest run up in any commodity in human history and the fastest amount of time in human history. So Ransom, how do you think that's going to affect the rest of our financial system? I'll let you run with that because I know you had some ideas on collapse here.
Well, it seems to me that, I'm not an economic whiz or anything, but I've been paying attention to people talking, and almost all of the investors are saying things like all of these tech companies are about to pop because they've reached their max reach as far as potential customers to join their services. So it's going to plateau off. But in the meantime, it seems like a lot of money, not only government monies, but banker monies, is moving in and out of different tech companies like Meta or, social media companies even. And all of the money is being moved around in a way that the average Joe can't see what's happening. They just don't know where it's going. And, I bought into a bunch of cryptocurrency a few years back, and everything got so rough for a while that we ate that, we paid bills with that or whatever. And I made small gains on that in just the short amount of time that I was doing it. However, if I would have left all of that money alone, almost all of it's tripled or quadrupled by now. But now I sold it off because I needed real cash or real commodities in real life. And I think that's kind of where the population is sitting at. A lot of their older, kind of investments like 401ks, I've noticed a lot of companies are dropping those, and they're not even offering that as an option for workers that they employ. The entire workforce is cut back. All of the traditional transitional wealth through generational means has disappeared. People have lost their land, the bulk of the money that the value of what they had. And I think it's all going to come to, a head at the same time as they go ahead and pull the rug out of the paper dollar money. I mean, what a lot of people, a lot of other even leaders in the world laugh at us because they know we're completely run off the central banks, where they, print money and then we borrow on that money. There's never anything really there. If they need more money, they just print more. But what they get is physical, actual products, produce, and wealth out of the exchange. And they're running out of stuff to take at this point worldwide. So I think that's why they're ready to go ahead and transition to a new system. And when they do that, lots of wealth will be transferred and no one will know how or why or be able to trace what happened to it. It'll just be in new people's hands. And I think Bitcoin's one of those avenues that it's going to happen. From what I understand, no one can take the Bitcoin from you. Although there have been thefts of Bitcoin and different things like that, those were all people that did not protect their information correctly, and that's how it was taken. So if you have a Bitcoin, no one can take it from you. The government can't take it from you. People can't rob you from it. It's wealth that's hidden and out of the hands of stuff. And that's why the governments haven't liked it. But now that they know they can just absorb it or create an equivalent that, both of them are basing on a market on each other after a while. Where did you put your money? Did you put it with these guys or did you put it with these? Somebody has to fail. And when they fail, all of that wealth just disappears seemingly to the people that had real assets like properties and investments and things, or even, the real precious metals that they own. They'll now have to break that out as their reserve currency because the digital currency that they might have put it in has converted to something else, or the paper money that they've been accustomed to using has disappeared. And what does that mean for the banks? That means all those digital zeros and ones at some point can just equate to zero, because all of a sudden the dollar is not doing anything. And at that same point, that's when you'll see the distraction over to war and food really start pushing. And there's been so many people talking about the bursting of the biggest bubble of all, which is the Federal Reserve-backed piece of paper. It's not based on anything. And now that our country doesn't really make anything, our GDP is not really worth what it was, because that's people we're talking about. And although we have a lot of people, those people no longer produce. And it's the biggest transformation of wealth in human history. And Obama is actually the one that coined that. If you remember, he talked about how energy prices had to go up necessarily, and that there needs to be the biggest transformation of wealth in human history. And that's indeed what's been going on since his time. And how many times has this cycle actually went through where they moved the money around in this, shell game? Basically, you can go back to Enron, the banker bailouts, all of this stuff. It's just where money just disappears and people don't know where it went. Or you could pick other more geopolitically involved things like 9/11, where lots of money was transferred or disappeared. And that's the direction you're going. So if you're not actually accumulating things that can keep you alive in real time, you might be in trouble, because things are kind of turning nasty. But they always have the ability to keep an economy afloat through war. So, we may have another slight fake economic growth or something like that for a period of time because all of the new deals are being made. But eventually the small guy is left with an inflated paper dollar. And then who's the Weimar Republic then? I mean, that's kind of the joke, right? Everybody's joking about that our system of the dollar is actually based on nothing.
Except our ability to promise that we'll come in and whoop the tar out of you if you don't agree. That's what the agreement was. Got to come in and tell you what to do. There's a great book. I know I spoke about this one time before. I think it's called Rotten Fruit. It was written about the coup and subsequent civil war in Guatemala in the 1950s. because Dole Banana Company, a famous banana company, pineapple company at that time, owned, I don't know how many acres, about 1 million acres under production in Guatemala. And the new government came in and was like, well, you need to pay taxes on that land at the fair value. Apparently before, there was some kind of underhanded shady deal where they were only paying a fraction of the taxes, obviously greased palms from that. And new government comes in, I think it was 57, 58, somewhere around there. And they're like, they were more of a, populist type thing. Say, well, you need to pay your taxes. You own an enormous amount of land. You got everything for bargain basement. You're not even really paying any assessment on that. So you have to start paying taxes on that land. And suddenly, lo and behold, the government dissolved under a civil war. And then who was installed? Somebody more favorable to the banana company. So you got to realize that civil wars are fought over fruit and taxes on farmland in the 50s. That's the level U.S. went to reinstall a new friendly Western pro-agriculture government in there that wouldn't require the taxes to be paid by the American companies operating in Guatemala in the 1950s. That's how far back it goes. And that's the level to go to. One company can actually have an op done for their company in a country to destabilize it so they don't have to pay taxes. It's like a pay for play. Okay, Dole Company probably has a lobbyist that hits up one of the 3-letter agencies and said, we need to stop this taxation thing. Okay, we'll do it. We'll do it for this percentage. And then ongoing revenue continues to roll back in. So I'm really wondering what the ongoing revenue is from that op that was carried out in the late 1950s in Guatemala that Dole still pays to those agencies. It's probably a lifetime contract. You do it once. Okay, we'll pay you as long as we're in business. We'll continue to pay. I'm really wondering, how much has been transferred, but how much has been saved in taxes during those 40, 50 years also. I mean, everywhere you look, people are tired of the bullying. People are tired of the broken promises of retrieval of their gold, which is not forthcoming. People are a little bit tired of them having to have dollars and use the SWIFT system and are penalized if they choose to go outside that and try something new, that they'll suddenly have sanctions put on them. There's a lot of things if you can think back in school when you used to be able to fist fight and you didn't go to, and it was just part of growing up. If you grew up in the 70s, you probably got into a fight or you seen a fight. It was just part of what school kids did. I know in this day and day, you couldn't even fathom such a thing. But people did after school, get off the school property so you don't get suspended. People would have fist fights. This is like all the kids in the school finally tired of that one bully, and 30 dudes are coming after the one guy in the back of the schoolyard, and even the teachers are turning a blind eye to whatever happens to the bully of the school. We're kind of seeing it in real time. And, talking about food, now the BRICS nations, in addition to all the Middle Eastern nations, are setting up their own grain delivery and grain exchange outside the US dollar. So anything traded amongst almost 20 nations in terms of food production. And this includes places like Kazakhstan. To answer your question, Ransom, if Russia has one of its the Western Front gets bogged down where a lot of agricultural production is, Kazakhstan, which has 10 million extra tons of grain, has agreed to split what it normally sends to China to divert some to Russia if needed. Because Kazakhstan is the breadbasket for China. Almost all the production goes to China. Now, the Ukraine used to export or produce 30 million tons of grain and export 20 million tons. But if anybody's seen any images lately of that place, I don't think there's going to be very much coming in the way of grains this year from the Ukraine. And everywhere you look, I saw that article you just sent about the solar cycle. There's an enormous amount of things currently that are jet streams are out of the flows. There's just a lot of things that aren't working correctly. So we're even getting more damage to the system of agriculture that relies on normal rainfalls that can be predicted. And that normal wind patterns can be predicted, planting and harvesting dates can be predicted. Because one thing that's happening in the amount of wind, the wind damage, the wind velocity, the speed of the wind across the planet is definitely upticking. If you've noticed, every time a storm comes in, it's faster, it's sideline winds. For anybody who's been outside and noticing nature, wind is very stronger on these storm fronts. I've had more, umpteen amounts of people, because I run the Adapt 2030 channel, and a lot of it's about this type of cyclic change and these mega storms coming in, predicted on cycles, that in this last 2 to 3 months, I've had a huge amount of people, like way more than in the last, 8 years of the channel. These last 3 months, I've had more people write me about wind than I ever have before. Like, the wind is a thing. It's really starting to become ferocious in the storms and the hail events also, which damage crops. So now put this all into the jet streams are way out of their flows and going to continue to be more unstable. We got the sideline winds, which are never good for crops anyway. Those derechos will waste 1 million acres of crop in an afternoon. The hail's no good for crops either. That usually only hits a few thousand acres at a time, though. But with the winds increasing, the rainfall not being as predictable as before, too much rain bad, too little rain bad. So now we got that going on, this flip-flop of super soaker events, and then other areas drying out that used to be breadbaskets or very well-known agricultural zones like Spain. They're having a ferocious drought right now. I mean, you look at everything from the olives to the wine, everything in Spain just on hold at the moment because any kind of citrus products coming out. The only place that they're still very, they're able to produce is Almeria, where they have those, thousands of acres of greenhouses down there because they can climate control it. But a lot of that's been ripped up from the winds and the hail lately. So the food ecosystem that we're looking across the planet is one thing, but then the way the food producers are labeling your foods. So if anybody knows, today, March 1st, is the official date that all boxes in America have to be labeled with GMO product. Before it was a California specific thing, but now across the entire United States, March 1st, 2024, today is the food labeling deadline. So what does that mean for you and me? Well, if you go and you pick up a box of cereal like Cheerios or something, and you look on the back, it will say genetically modified. They quit using the word GMOs. They moved it over to bioengineering. So you'll either see like genetically modified or bioengineering. Is bioengineering probably more prevalent now on the boxes? They have to legally label it now. But there was a caveat in there, as you know there would be. If there was over layers and multiple layers of bioengineered crops, like you had GM corn and GM soy in a product with GM corn syrup from the cornstarch syrup that was also genetically modified corn original derivative on the dent corn, that all had to be labeled as genetically modified. But can you imagine reaching on the back of a box? Genetically modified sugar, genetically modified soybean, genetically modified corn. I mean, any mother would look at that and go, what in the heck? No. So the caveat is, because there's so much GMO labeling and there's so much of it in our food supply in America, that they've given the option to the food producers to put QR codes in lieu of writing the ingredient list on the box. This also, for our favorite insecta chitin, or I think that's how you call the exoskeleton of an insect, chitin or something like this, also not very popular on the labels. So they're also allowed to QR code that. So multiple layerings of bioengineered food products or insect proteins included in the foods are now allowed to hide behind the barcode. Well, it's actually a QR code, QR code. So they have these apps that you can download on your phone, and you'll have to go through the store and you'll have to scan each box, and then it takes a second or two, but eventually the ingredient list will pop up after you scan the QR code. But they realized too that people are busy and they barely read the boxes today anyway. And when they have the extra additional step of having to get out their phone and scan the box with a QR code, that is going to dissuade an enormous amount of people from even attempting to look. The same thing with a website. If you make somebody else click once, 50% of your traffic drops for one click. One scroll of the mouse going down the page off of the fold drops your percentage 25%. That's for one scroll down the page. If they have to click one box, 50% of your traffic's gone. So think about the complexity of downloading the app on your phone, bringing your phone with the app to the store, getting out your app every time, getting the box off the shelf, scanning the app, and then reading the app or reading the ingredient label off of each. Very few people, probably 5%, maybe. But those are the same 5% that would have read the ingredient list and said, nope, back on the shelf it goes. So they're trying to disguise the degradation of the food. And also I had a number for you because I did a video on this, Ransom, here. The filler amount now is 28% maximum in the food supply. And you'll notice that there's a different texture and a different flavor to a lot of your favorite foods over the last 5 years because as food prices were going up and during COVID and the supply chains were breaking down, they allowed companies to add more filler into the food, knowing the same thing, that they weren't able to get the supplies that they normally do. So they've done an enormous amount of tests on this. I didn't realize like how many tens of thousands of peer-reviewed research papers there are on this. Of sugarcane, usually their favorite one in the filler industry is sugarcane. Because after they squeeze the juice out, you get something called bagasse. And then they strip the outer layer, and then you have that kind of white cellulose on the inside from the sugarcane. Once they bleach that, man, it'll mix into liquid clear as day, and you'll never even know it's in there. Same with foods. It doesn't discolor. It's pure white. It's fluffy. They can do any percentages they want. So tens of thousands of research papers on anywhere from 1% up to 50%. They did all these experiments, and the human body cannot, anything more than 31%, the human body will reject it. So they were able to pull these percentages up to 28%. So that's your allowable filler inside of food, which is not food. It's actually cellulose dust or cellulose powder from different plants. Sawdust, basically. But in a higher quality sawdust. It's pretty, it's white, it's transparent at times. So your allowable amount of filler, they can't go any higher on the filler. See, this is where another problem that they've run into a ceiling on food pricing. Is because before COVID, most companies were putting around 13 to 15% filler in because they were able to get things at a much lower cost than post-COVID or during COVID. But during that time when the companies were struggling on cost and profitability, they realized that they could just add more filler because they couldn't get their soybean supply. They couldn't get their corn supply. They couldn't get whatever, their sugar beet supply or whatever it is that they needed for their production. So they just started putting filler. Now the filler market boomed. If anybody had stocks in this, cellulose filler market, you made a killing. Think about doubling the amount of product that they needed to put out. So we've run to the wall here. So the way companies were keeping cost on the food down was adding more filler. Now they've run to the maximum allowable amount, even through the USDA, which is like super absurd anyway. 30% of your food is now cellulose, almost. 28% maximum allowable by law. 31% the human body kicks it back and doesn't digest, and you have an enormous amount of problems because of that filler being, the cellulose being too high. The human body, you can't digest wood at that percentage in the food or in your stomach. So there's no more ways for companies to save food or save cost except for shrinkflation, which they've already shrunk it so far that they really need to start cutting down on the size of the boxes. And we could point fingers at them and say, look, you're talking about all the degradation in the environment and cutting trees and this, that, and the other, but your boxes are twice the size of the volume of the food inside the box. Now get a grip and cut your box size in half to reflect the food percentage in the box or the food weight in the box. You know, you get something, you shake it, and you can hear it shake from top to bottom because it's not full. These companies, at least 30% of their boxes could be reduced by, 30% reduction in the box size, because that's what they're doing, shrinkflation. They're removing 30% of the food volume and then still charging the same price or raising your prices. And the filler as well, they've run the cost. So a lot of things have hit their ceiling. It is no more. This, from this point, is going to cost you more money. They've done everything, way, shape, form, and fashion that they can to cut their costs to keep profitability, but that game's run over. It's out of town now. So the next thing is just food prices up and up and up. And with this new USDA Food Labeling Act starting today, you're going to see a lot more scrutiny on the food supply. Like, myself, I'm not in the States now, but if I was, so if anybody wants to do a story, I'm going to give you a story that I would do myself. I would get the app on my phone and I would just go around a supermarket and just take a look at boxes trying to describe to hide the food ingredients in the QR code and just do a video on that. Just walk around and, look at what the different labels are of E. It starts with an E for insect proteins. There's like E201. There's a whole bunch of different ones now. There's dozens of codes now. Before it was just cricket protein, but now there's like a huge amount of them, caterpillar proteins, all these kind of things. So each of them starts with an E, and then you'll have to look at like E010 or E100 or E201. You have to look up and then find the reference code for what the E is. Because even when you go in the QR code and it says like E 101 or something or 010, they're not going to tell you what that protein is. You'll have to go to another separate app and look up where the insect proteins are classified by the E designation. So it's going to be like a two-step process. Now, very few, that's like 1% of consumers will go that far. But if you're going to do a news story on this, especially with the labeling coming on, you're hitting the day right now. I'm curious myself what's disguised inside those QR codes that's not forthcoming on the labels that they want to hide from the public. Like, that's a breaking story for me. But I'm in Asia and they don't do the same thing here. Everything's still labeled. There's no QR codes on the boxes. But anyway, Ransom, I was trying to answer like 6 or 7 questions from our previous hour because I took notes. So anyway, I'm done. I need a drink of water.
Actually, I was wanting to hear kind of how it's going. I mean, you've been traveling, getting to see other people in other places. And, when I think about that, I compare what I see where I live. And unfortunately, I live near a place I grew up. So I'm able to, put 2 and 2 together when I see generations of people that haven't made it to the future, or if they made it, they're severely diminished by the world. And it's something that's so much more prevalent than decades past, or even when I was growing up, but lots of people talked about it and warned about it, that, future parts of civilization would have massive amounts of poor shantytown areas. And I'm sure you've probably seen that on almost every science fiction movie about a dystopic future. It's over and over again, that message is sent out there. But now you can drive outside in most American cities and see it. It's no longer science fiction, but science fact. There's just little science to it. So there are signs all around us about the implosion of Western civilization. Most people that probably listen to this show or watch these channels know that's not really even in dispute. There's so many programs working at one time, and we kind of went over the one that was war. That's kind of obvious to all people and always a trigger for fear. But on top of that, you stack this changing environment of the mentality of people that think they're free. So if you went back to the 1980s and even the early 1990s, all pre-genetically modified ingredients, there was a boom of choices, a boom of new products. That was the hook. If you remember, there was new junk food of every kind. There was new ways to eat dinner. There was, life seemed like it was very promising to those people that lived in the Western world. Crime rates were going down. The style of living was going up. Standard of living was going up. But now you've seen all of that reversed in the last couple of decades in, like right on cue after 2001. So that was the cue for you to know that they have decided that the eras have changed. We're now in the time of Aquarius, and everybody kind of realizes that, whether you're religious or you just keep track of the precession of the equinox and which phase we're at in it, that time has changed over. So we're in a new time, and all of these groups that sort of created the whole field of technocrats and eugenics and engineered civilization are all pulling their ideas and their plans out right now. And I was kind of going through, some of these articles to show people different things that are prevalent in our time. And one of those is microscopic nanotechnology. And this is becoming ever more a reality. And you were kind of speaking to that same thing, but on a genetic level. And we've talked about this many times. Our entire ecosystem and biosphere has been changed since about the year of 1991, I think. And then by, as the years progress, more and more of that product hit the market. And now, combined with what you were talking about, adding fillers to it, new compounds that really you have to educate yourself really good to know what each compound does and what it does in combination with the other compounds that might be present. And then you realize, just regular everyday epiphanies of how these multinational conglomerate food distribution cartels have got away with things in the past, and they'll continue in that course of things in the future to get away with things. So Monsanto being one of them, just merging with another company, and then you get forgiven for everything that happened prior to that. Well, we'll go ahead and admit to this one guy and give him some, millions of dollars, because we'll admit we did wrong to this one guy, but not everybody, not the entire ecosystem. And when you really get into that, that all of the food producing countries not only are now in danger of war, but they've been toxified for the last 2 decades with things you couldn't believe, but mainly glyphosate. And you look at like Brazil, for example. I mean, they went wholeheartedly and believed in every bit of that. So that is all in the environment. And then you have now a toxic amount of heavy metals, an amazing, undeniable presence of plastics of different and various kinds. And they've even found out, I read a peer-reviewed paper recently where archaeologists digging down into layers of the earth that humans didn't even exist in are now finding that the plastics have permeated the bedrock and the layers of geology way past where we were present. So that tells you that you can't judge the environment now on dates and things because we as a modern civilization have saturated that. And that just kind of works into the plan of a reset of ideas. And, I saw this lady on Tucker Carlson. I don't know if you watched that. She got to live through the entire transformation of China through the years and then moved to the United States sometime in the 80s. And the way that she describes how easy it was for her civilization to transfer to a new civilization. And, I've talked about this many times. All you have to do is control the mindset of the youngest generation. So that of 20 years old that's actually out in the world. So about that age. And if you can convince them on certain ideas, they will have a revolution of ideas and replace the planet's previous civilization in no time. And if they were infected with the Marxist ideology, like they were in China, everything old has to go. And I mean everything: chairs, paintings, documents, ideas, and eventually people and ways of thinking. They have to go. So I don't know if the people of the Western world believe that they're somehow safe to this kind of tyrannical changeover and mindset of government. But I think we're all about to find out, because, it's clearly and plainly obvious that the countries of Western Europe and the United States have converted to a new style of thinking, a new economic system, and a new military attitude towards the world. And that is of complete banker, bought out, communist, crony capitalism, a merger of these all ideas, so that every last human and every last resource of the natural world will be monetized. And you were talking about those little codes that they want to put on everything. They are going to be put on us. You're going to have a phone or some kind of proof that you have participation in the new currency system, the new healthcare system, the new tracking system, et cetera, et cetera. It's all combined. And at this point, it's hard for anyone to argue that you can't be forced over into this new thing if they get the majority of a certain age group to do that, because we know over and over that has happened. And, the woman that was the guest on there that was talking about the reality of how they did it. Children literally beat their teachers to death in the school. And if you said anything against ideas that was going on with their, cultural revolution, you may just get beat to death or something worse on the spot. And we're talking children of ages to like 10 to 20 years old, in that age range, grouping together in mobs, taking what they want, destroying private property, changing the rules by default by, scaring anyone into trying to say or do anything that has to do with the world previous to their existence. Now, when you look out at the culture here in the United States specifically, and we see these same kind of things happening in mass. We've seen it for the last couple of years, where it's formed into an actual physical force that has destroyed billions of dollars of private property and commercial property, to the point where they have changed the entire method of delivering food to certain major metropolis and metropolitan areas. And we've seen the birth of the first communist, food store in Chicago, which inevitably failed, obviously, if we know history. And I guess I'll just leave it at that. Not trying to rail against the past, but it's obvious that certain things in the past are being pushed on the generation now. And if we don't get our house in order in the local area and teach kids how to grow and produce for themselves, they're very prone to turn into massive amounts of people that feel like they're entitled, or that they can just take what they want until there's nothing to take. And that's a very similar outcome to manipulating nature, as far as killing off animals to do a certain goal, or even, in my opinion, rewilding animals that don't belong in the modern ecosystem. So if you wanted to change the ecosystem and reduce the amount of people, I guess that would be a good idea to, repopulate and move everybody to a area of a dense area. And that's what they've always used to convince people that there's too many people in the world. And that's always been the truth. There's never been an overpopulation problem. There's always only been a population density problem. And that's because they move too many people into a small area, and those people do not produce the commodities that it takes to run a civilization. So, of course, eventually that system would collapse, just like it would in any ancient culture. When the food stopped, so did civilization. In every occurrence, whether it was man-made through government and democide, or whether, 3 or 4 volcanoes around the world decided to take a big burp, the same thing happens. Food production goes down, people go down, the number of people, and that's the phase we're in. And you know, I was going to show it again, these articles that they're pushing out now about nanotechnology and two-dimensional fabrics and materials, and then also the idea that scientists are completely and utterly confused when it comes to the magnetic field on Earth and its interaction with the sun, and then also the 11-year cycle of the sun. And it's more kind of propaganda telling you that, hey, watch out, the sun might turn everything off for you, and you know, things might be hard, so you better hurry up and get on the digital currency. And even though the satellites are down, they might have those little scanners working so that they could read your wrist or whatever to find out how much social credit score combination with actual funds that equated out of the dollar system, where they took like 100 to 1 of your worth when it transitioned to the new system. Is that too sci-fi, or is that something that you can see with the events happening right now going on, and especially with and you've talked about it a lot. Once it's at that system, that's when they can ration. That's when the rationing happens, whether it's a real supply chain problem or a real supply problem for the demand. It doesn't really matter if the governments or the controllers to the keys say it's a rationing time and we need to ration.
Yeah, if you had Starlink satellite, you could broadcast your own networks on the blockchain, your own transactions. You could be your own central bank if you have Starlink. So the traditional internet, if it goes down, if you got Starlink, you could do everybody's transactions, and you could be, take a little fee for doing that for people. Again, barter. What would you do? How valuable would that be for you to be able to broadcast transactions? If somebody didn't have access to the internet, but you got Starlink, still works, still goes out to the node, fine. But one comment as we close down here, the Cultural Revolution did sweep through China, and it had strongholds, obviously, in Beijing and the East Coast and bigger cities like Shanghai, et cetera. But in the western part of the country, the people realized that that was madness, and they started to hide the treasures that were being destroyed of the old world, that the Communist Party wanted to destroy everything old and just start from like 1949 and bring it forward. So the people in the western part, like Sichuan province, they hid the valuables. They wouldn't let the kids come in and destroy the temples. Like the further west you went and the further away from Beijing you got, the more they protected and the more they said no to this madness. So will it be the same from the West Coast this time in places like New York and Washington, or places down in Tennessee and rural Georgia? Like, where's going to be the spot where people are just going to say no, that where they're going to protect? Because that was the thing about don't come in and destroy our temples. And if people even buried things in their backyard because they knew the Red Guard was coming in, so they wouldn't destroy ancient China. Anyway, thanks for listening to us tonight. David DuByne signing off. Revolution Radio, please consider a donation. Hit the show notes, and we'll see you next week. Bye for now. Oh, Ransom, cool ads tonight at the break.
Thank you for listening to Revolution Radio.
This is Mysteries in the Histories. Over a period of 6 weeks in 1994, the small town of Oakville, Washington was hit with a bizarre string of storms that rained weird gelatinous blobs all over the town. And then people started getting sick. This is the weird and still unsolved mystery of the Oakville blobs. It began raining the clear gelatinous goop on the 7th of August. No one knew where it came from or what it was. The blobs contained similar-looking white cells as humans. People in the town who had contact with the blobs began feeling sick and scared a few hours later. Residents in the small city reported that what fell from the sky was not water, but gooey, slimy, clear and translucent blobs the size of a grain of rice. Over the next 3 weeks, in an area measuring 20 square miles, there would be 5 more events of the terrifying ooze raining down on unsuspecting citizens. There were reports of people developing flu-like symptoms from contact or proximity to the blobs, even of animals dying. the very day of the raining blobs. So what was it? And was it making people sick? A sample of the Oakville blobs was sent to the Hazardous Material Unit at the Department of Ecology of Washington State. Once received microbiologist Mike McDowell found 2 species of bacteria in the Oakville blobs, stating one of these was known to infect the human digestive system. But scientist Mike Osweiler of the Washington State Department said they found a number of cells of various sizes and 2 types of bacteria in the blobs, but were unable to identify them. They did, however, note that the cells did not have nuclei. This was significant because it refuted previous claims that the blobs contained human-like white blood cells, which do have nuclei. So what were the Oakville blobs? One theory is that it was jellyfish or parts of jellyfish dispersed into rain clouds by bombing runs carried out by the Air Force. Another theory, fluid waste from an airplane toilet, but the U.S. Federal Aviation Administration pointed out that this would have been blue, not translucent. Still another theory is that of an example of panspermia, an event dropping the unknown cells down upon the Earth. Panspermia is the hypothesis that life exists throughout the universe, distributed by space dust, meteoroids, asteroids, comets, and maybe even clouds of raining blobs perhaps. What if it was fluid waste from a UFO or UAP toilet? Just think about that for a minute. Ever since the 14th century, there have been reports of a substance very similar to the blobs in Oakville being found elsewhere, called star jelly, astral jelly, or astromyxin, named after the legend that it falls from the sky during meteor showers. What if the blobs never rained in the first place, that they emerged from a more earthly plane? This would require overlooking the witness statements of those who saw the blobs fall. But it has been a theory. All the original uncollected blobs have long disappeared, and there are no known remaining samples of the Oakville blobs, including at the Washington Department of Health. They apparently have no records of ever receiving any, but allegedly, the Washington State Department took all known samples and somehow misplaced them. Inter alia, frog spawn, sodium polyacrylate crystals or algae have been the source of other blob events. However, there are many unexplained instances of the raining goop, including in 2013 when slime was found at the Ham Wall Nature Reserve in Somerset, England. Despite sending samples for DNA testing to the Natural History Museum, just like in Oakville, no conclusion was ever reached or explanation given. Raining blobs of Oakville is another one of the great mysteries in the histories. Sign up to our show notes email list and get access to longer episodes of Mysteries in the Histories just for signing up. Signing up for the show notes, you get behind-the-scenes thoughts and points we sometimes can't relay over social media platforms. Brought to you by ITM Trading. ITM Trading has spent the last 28+ years developing a team of expert researchers and gold and silver analysts to make this possible. Simply put, we build strategies which are historically proven to protect your wealth and assets through any economic downturn. 866-834-1422. That's 866-834-1422.